Rich Analog, and welcome to Tone Tips. In this edition of Tone Tips, we're going to look at the notion that less is more, as a starting point at least. There's a fantastic interview with Yngwie where he takes up an issue with the idea that less is more by simply stating that actually more is more. Yngwie is absolutely correct from one perspective. When it comes to getting good tone, well, ultimately tone is subjective, and so the idea is subjective. I'd like to talk to you about the idea of structuring your sound. Now, each one of you is going to have a different idea of what is an ideal sound, depending on the kind of music that you like. If you're into speed metal, you probably aren't going to think like a jazz tone is going to be great. By the same token, if you're into country music, you might not enjoy the sound of classic rock setup. So everybody's different. What I'd like to do is try and discuss some ideas that could be universal for us all. And so to start with the idea that less is more, and then work on from there. So the first thing I would do if I was putting together a rig, and you can do this even if you have a rig that's already set up and you're just not happy with it, I would take my guitar and I would plug it straight into the amplifier with a nice, good quality lead and have a listen to that sound. When you build anything, the most essential thing is obviously the foundations, because if your foundation isn't strong and isn't solid, then the rest of the structure is going to be flawed. By the same token, if the sound of your guitar going into your amplifier doesn't sound right, nothing that you add to it is going to sound right. So always go guitar amplifier first. Even if you're going to add a bunch of pedals, rack units, multiple amplifiers, multiple guitars, start with the basic sound of how the guitar sounds plugged into the amplifier or amplifiers. And once you've established that, then you can add pedal one at a time. The benefit of adding pedals one at a time is obviously you get to hear the sound of the individual device within the signal chain and out of the signal chain. Obviously, when you're putting multiple pedals together, how they all work together is a different thing than them individually. So it's the whole combination that you're going to be ending up hearing. But it's important to hear how each pedal sounds by itself. So then you know, it's like tasting the ingredients separately. So you know how sugar tastes, or you know how maple syrup tastes. You're not going to make something which just tastes of sugar or maple syrup, but having an idea of how those taste and how they interact with other flavors is of value. So I would start personally with overdrive or distortion. If you're going to be adding overdrive or distortion, I would put that in first and see how that sounds, particularly if it's a sound that you're going to be using for the majority of the time. So if it's part of your foundation tone, as some people refer to it. So I would put the overdrive in. Then I would, if I was using compression, I would put that in and see how it sounds in and out of the signal path, because obviously it's going to have an effect on the sound of your overdrive and also of your clean sound with the overdrive off. And then after that I add modulation and delay effects, and finally the more obscure sort of synthesizer type sounds, and potentially pitch modulation, not modulation, but pitch changing, harmonizers and such like, octave pedals at the conclusion. Obviously everyone's different. You're going to have a different idea of the end sound, but the idea of actually following a process of putting it together is not a bad idea at all. There is a complete flip to this. In the age that we live in right now, there are a million YouTube clips of people talking about pedals and how they sound and demoing pedal X, and so it's very easy for a person to come to a pedal that they've just purchased with all of this expectation and all of these pre-structured ideas about what it's going to do for them and how it should sound and how they should use it. When you reflect back to the early years of rock music, people like Hendrix using guitar effects pedals, there weren't YouTube clips of people telling Jimmy how he should use his Univibe or his wah pedal. Basically it was a fresh slate, so he was going to it with no expectations, with just his ears and his fingers and his hands to determine how he used those pedals, which is a really great way of doing things. The idea of putting together pedals in unique and different ways. There is no right and wrong way. You know, I'm talking to you about starting with the amplifier and the guitar and then adding overdrive, compression, modulation, delay, and then harmonizers and such like, synthesizers. That's a suggestion. That's not necessarily the best way to go about it. I do believe that having a good sound from your guitar and amplifier is a great starting point, but then after that it really is open season. If you've got a specific idea of what you want to sound like, for instance if you're into classic rock or blues, you're probably not going to be looking for the more obscure sort of stuff. So, you know, it'd probably be safe to say that you could benefit from using an overdrive or a fuzz or a distortion and maybe a little bit of delay, and maybe just a little bit of some sort of Yngwie sort of thing, something like that. You know, you're taking your idea of sound from what's gone on before. If you're more abstract, I was going to say progressive, but more abstract, then the canvas is a lot more open for you to put things together in random fashions and to take that approach that I'm talking about. Those guys in the early years of rock had with equipment, of taking it as a blank canvas to go forth and experiment with. So there's just some thoughts, some ideas. Start with amp and guitar, get that sound right, then add things, listen to them by themselves so that you have an idea of how they taste and sound. They will probably taste pretty metallic or plasticky, and put them together. Try different orders, obviously, and then also the idea of approaching things from a completely random perspective, and you know, even to the extent of taking your pedals, getting someone else to put them together in different order, covering them with a sheet or something that you can't see through, plug in and adjust controls so you don't even know what each pedal is doing, would be an extremely random way of dialing up different sort of sounds. There's no right, there's no wrong, but starting with things very simply, guitar and amplifier, is not a bad way of doing things. Anyway, that's Tone Tips for this month. Next month we'll be doing some actual playing and listening to some sounds. But until then, be sure to subscribe to us. Please feel free to post comments. My name is Ben Fulton, and it's been a pleasure chatting with you today.